Well, good evening. And welcome to the campus of Jacksonville State University for tonight's Free Speech Forum. Events like these are the very foundation of higher education and our society. Statesman and abolitionist Frederick Douglass stood before an audience in 1860 and proclaimed, "No right was deemed by the fathers of the government more sacred than the right of speech." It was in their eyes, as in the eyes of all thoughtful men, the great moral renovator of society and government. Many others have expressed their thoughts over the years on the First Amendment and, in particular, freedom of speech. Identifying panelists for an event of this magnitude was not an easy task. Tonight's forum features expert panelists who have extensive knowledge of constitutional law, with a special emphasis on the First Amendment, and policymakers who have actively participated in First Amendment issues. Thank you, panelists, for participating tonight and sharing your wisdom with us. There are also delegates from various levels of our government in attendance, and if you are here, please wave your hand. I know Councilman Andy Green is here from the City of Jacksonville, who's serving dual roles, but thank you for your attendance. As I look out into the audience, I also see students, faculty, and staff, as well as members of the community. Whether you're here for extra credit, I know some of you here are, that's okay, or have an interest in this topic, I am certain you will come away with a better understanding of free speech. At this time, I will ask all who are able to stand for the presentation of colors by the Jacksonville State University Army ROTC Honor Guard and remain standing for the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early lights what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you, Jacksonville State University Army ROTC Honor Guard and Mr. Brady Drake for that moving presentation. Tonight's Free Speech Forum is a collaborative effort between the American Democracy Project and the Judge Frank M. Johnson Jr. Institute. The American Democracy Project, also known as the ADP, at Jacksonville State University is a non-political, cooperative effort by students, faculty, staff, and administrators to promote civic engagement. The ADP was established in 2003 as an initiative of the American Association of State Colleges and Universities. and is now a network of nearly 300 state colleges and universities collaborating to deepen the impact public higher education institutions have on preparing students. The ADP officially began on our campus in 2007 under the leadership of President Dr. William A. Meehan and Provost Dr. Rebecca O. Turner, with the hosting of the first program on Constitution Day 2009. Dr. Turner remained committed to the mission of ADP throughout her tenure as provost and had planned to join us tonight but was unable to do so. She is watching us online, so hello, Dr. Turner. Thank you to the members of the ADP committee who, along with others acknowledged in tonight's program, have made tonight's event possible. Dr. Lori Owens, Chair, Mr. Brady Drake, Ms. Albertha Grant, Mr. Andy Green, Dr. Ben Gross, Mr. Dakota Heathcock, Dr. Teresa Reed, Ms. Macy Spears, and Ms. Kim Westbrooks. The Judge Frank M. Johnson Jr. Institute is a nonpartisan voice that shares the stories of our Constitution and our judiciary through programs that illuminate issues and perspectives, foster thoughtful and civil discourse, and inspire our national community in our nation's never-ending pursuit of a more perfect union. Thank you, Mr. Thomas Raines, Executive Director of the Judge Frank Johnson Institute, and Ms. Deborah Long, Co-Chair of the Judge Frank Johnson Institute Board of Directors, for your support and participation in tonight's forum. If you don't mind, let's stop and give those I called out earlier, as well as these two individuals, a round of applause for their help. Please welcome back to the podium President Killingsworth as he introduces tonight's panelists and moderators.
Thank you, Provost Shelton. To allow for maximum time for question and answer, we are sharing an abridged introduction of tonight's panelists and moderators. The full biographies of the panel members and moderators can be found in the hard copy and digital program. Panelists and moderators, please take your seat at the front when I call your name. Luther Strange served as a United States Senator from 2017 to 2018 and as Alabama Attorney General from 2011 to 2017. As Attorney General, Strange successfully argued a free speech case before the United States Supreme Court, Lane v. Franks, in 2014. Strange served as the chairman of the Republican Attorney General Association and as coordinating counsel for the 5 Gulf Coast states in the Deepwater Horizon oil spill litigation. As Attorney General, Strange made fighting public corruption a focal point of his tenure. Senator Strange earned his bachelor's degree and law degree from Tulane University. Attorney General Strange served as a keynote speaker for Jacksonville State University's 2011 Constitution and Citizenship Day celebration. Welcome back to our campus, Senator Strange. Professor Brian Fair is Thomas E. Skinner Professor of Law at the University of Alabama School of Law with expertise in the First Amendment. Professor Fair earned his undergraduate degree from Duke and his law degree from UCLA. Professor Fair has served as faculty advisor for the Moot Court Team, Black Law Students Association, Outlaw and Law Democrats, and he currently serves on the board of directors at the Southern Poverty Law Center. Professor Fair is the author of Notes of a Racial-Cased Baby, Colorblindness and the End of Affirmative Action. Professor Fair served as a speaker at Jacksonville State University's celebration of the 225th anniversary of the Constitution in 2012. Welcome back to our campus, Professor Fair. Dr. Alan Lincoln is a commander in the United States Naval Reserve and associate professor of political science and director of undergraduate studies in the Department of Political Science at the University of Alabama. Dr. Lincoln earned his bachelor's degree and Master of Public Policy from the University of Albany, State University of New York, his law degree from Albany Law School, and his doctorate from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Dr. Lincoln is admitted to the practice law in the state of New York. He teaches courses in constitutional law, law and society, and trial advocacy. His research interest focuses on the Supreme Court, civil military relations, and public law. Dr. Lincoln's current book project deals with a modern examination of civil-military relations and is titled The Modern Major General. Welcome, Dr. Lincoln. Unfortunately, our fourth panelist, U.S. District Judge Keith Watkins, is unable to attend tonight due to an illness. We extend well wishes to Judge Watkins and thank him for agreeing to participate in tonight's forum. Dr. Lori Owens is Professor of Political Science and Dean of Honors and Special Programs at Jacksonville State University, where she has been employed since 1998. She earned her bachelor's degree from JSU and her master's degree and doctoral in political science from the University of Alabama. Dr. Owens chairs the JSU American Democracy Project Committee, the Study Abroad Subcommittee, and serves as campus advisor for the pre-law program and faculty advisor for the Model UN and Model Arab League debate teams. Dr. Owens is a board member and past chair of the Alabama Higher Education Partnership and is a maritime member and past chair of the Alabama Women's Commission. Dr. Owens' dissertation included a detailed analysis of how the Robert Bork hearings impacted the judicial nomination and confirmation process. As dean, Dr. Owens still teaches one course a semester and leads Washington, D.C. study away and Ireland study abroad opportunities. Her current book project is the life and career of U.S. Senator James Allen of Gadsden, Alabama. Please welcome Dr. Owens. Mr. Thomas Raines is the Executive Director of the Judge Frank M. Johnson Jr. Institute, which was founded in 2019. Previously, Mr. Raines advocated for education policies to increase college and career readiness across Alabama. He has worked as a middle school teacher in the Mississippi Delta, as a journalist covering finance in New York, and as a researcher of politics and policy in Washington, D.C. He is a member of the advisory board for Teach for America, Alabama, previously as vice chair, and is a member of the Family Guidance Center of Montgomery's Success by Six Advisory Board. Mr. Raines is a graduate of Leadership Montgomery, Legacy Class 35, and the Alabama Leadership Initiative. He holds a Master of Public Administration from Columbia University and dual bachelor's degrees in History and Journalism from Boston University. Welcome, Mr. Raines. We thank each of you for participating in the forum tonight. At this time, I will turn it over the program to our moderators.
Thank you, President Killingsworth. So glad to see all of you tonight. A lot of hard work has gone into this program, and I do want to take just a few minutes before we begin to recognize a few people. I particularly want to thank the President and the Provost for their support of this free speech forum. Not every college administration would be supportive of an event like this, but we started talking about this in the summer of 2022, so we're very glad to see the project come to fruition. I also want to thank Debbie Long, who co-chairs the Judge Frank Johnson Institute, and she's been my colleague on the Alabama Women's Commission for 20 years, so she and I have worked together for a long time. And actually, she's the one who first suggested the idea of collaborating with the Institute when I reached out to her about individuals in Alabama who might support a free speech forum and be people who could address an audience like this. So Debbie first introduced me to Thomas Raines, the Institute's executive director. And it's been a pleasure to work with Thomas and the Institute to make this forum a reality. Acknowledgements are in the program, but I do want to say a special thank you to the staff in honors and special programs, many of you have seen them here tonight, for all of their hard work in preparing for this event. Andy Green, Brady Drake, and Alex Black. And also our graduate assistant and university student assistants are living proof that angels are walking among us. Aubrey Whidden in particular drafted the program for tonight. Doesn't it look nice? Yes. But all of these students contributed to this endeavor, and what they have done has been vital to us. So the staff and students are here with us tonight working, and we could not have done any of this without them. I also want to thank my colleagues on the ADP committee and across campus who encouraged students to submit questions and submitted questions themselves, and they've helped us profile the Free Speech Forum over the last several weeks. Many of them are in the audience tonight, along with their students. Thank you for your support. So why are we here tonight? Over the last several years, students, faculty, and staff from various universities and across the political spectrum have expressed to me their apprehension in expressing their views on campus. I found it particularly disturbing that students felt this way. Uneasiness about sharing one's thought on public policy matters is not confined to universities. Anyone who stays well informed on current events realizes that an absence of rational dialogue in our everyday political discourse is an issue. Our goal is to start a discussion that we hope will continue on this campus and extend to the community and to other college campuses. As one Supreme Court justice so eloquently stated, the best way to combat speech that we do not like or that is considered harmful or offensive is more speech, not enforced silence. As highlighted by Provost Shelton, Dr. Rebecca Turner is responsible for the implementation of the ADP on our campus, and she always supported our programs. And as she mentioned, she is watching it live stream tonight. So again, thank you, Dr. Turner, for all you did to get ADP off the ground. In addition to our Constitution Day speakers, some of our signature programs included a Fourth Amendment panel, Congress to Campus, a Freedom Riders panel, and our 9/11 20th Anniversary Remembrance panel. Finally, thank you to our panelists who are graciously sharing their time and expertise with us this evening. Senator Strange and Professor Fair, it is good to have you back on campus again. Dr. Lincoln, we are glad that you're contributing to this dialogue. And we do regret that Judge Watkins is ill and cannot join us, as we were looking forward to his wisdom and insights from a judicial viewpoint. I will now recognize Thomas Raines, who will be moderating this panel with me tonight. Mr. Raines.
Good evening. I want to say thank you to President Killingsworth and Provost Shelton and Dr. Owens and the entire Jacksonville State University community for hosting us tonight. And thank you to each of our panelists for sharing your time and your expertise this evening. One of our charter board members is Judge Keith Watkins. He sends his best regards. He very much wanted to be here tonight. And I hope that we can do this another time as well. The Johnson Institute is a nonpartisan voice that shares the stories of our Constitution and our judiciary through programs that illuminate issues and perspectives, foster thoughtful and civil discourse, and inspire our national community and our nation's never-ending pursuit of a more perfect union. This is just that kind of event. We are named after a remarkable Alabamian and a historic jurist, Judge Frank Johnson, who did his job and upheld the law, the rule of law, during a tumultuous period in our nation's history. As U.S. District Judge in Montgomery, Alabama, beginning in 1955, Judge Johnson faced death threats and ostracism throughout his career as his rulings upheld the civil and human rights of everyone, including the marginalized, in case after case through his career. It is an honor for the Johnson Institute to co-host this event tonight, and we hope that you find it meaningful and thought-provoking and enlightening. Thank you for having us here.
Sorry, just a few housekeeping items. If you would, please put your cell phones on vibrate or off for the duration of the program. Gentlemen on the panel, no one has ownership of these questions, so if there's something that you want to chime in on after one of your fellow panelists have commented, feel free to do so. Our aim is to begin the closing statements somewhere along 7:30 or 7:35, so let's just keep that in mind as we move along. We will attempt to get to as many questions as we can, but we're fairly certain we won't be able to get to all of them. Because we had a virtual call with these gentlemen last week, and they went over a little last week, so I think they may do that tonight too. But we're looking forward to what they have to say. They have much that they can share, much insight. So we're very happy to begin. We will start with opening remarks from the panel members, and we will start with Senator Strange.
There we go. How's that? That sound good? You can hear me all right? Great. Usually I stand up, but that would give you a crick in your neck if I was doing that. I really want to thank the president and the provost again for this nice opportunity. I can't believe it's been since 2011 that I was on this beautiful campus. And I know you've struggled with the tornado and the aftermath of that, but it looks beautiful. And I'm so glad to be back. As I shared with Professor Owens, who I have to thank first and foremost for our friendship over all these many years, I'm getting back on college campuses myself and teaching at the law school at the University of Alabama, which has been something that's been really a treat, meeting with smart young students who have this issue and a lot of other issues that we are dealing with in our society now. So it's a really special opportunity for me to see some of the students here in the class, special credit or not. I'm glad you're here, and I hope you learn a little bit and we challenge you some. And then last of all, in my brief opening remarks, I just want to acknowledge my old friend, Dr. Congressman Glenn Browder. He's a treasure for Alabama and has been a friend for so long, and I'm so glad to have the opportunity to see him today. So thank you.
Professor Fair, excuse me.
So good evening, everyone. It's lovely to be here again. Thank everyone from the JSU community for the invitation and the warm reception in my return. For the past 33 years, I've had the privilege and honor of teaching law students at the University of Alabama constitutional law. And in the basic constitutional law class, we cover First Amendment materials, and then I teach advanced courses on the First Amendment, seminars and surveys that take a deeper dive. I begin that class by looking at international materials and international charters so that the students at Alabama have a sense that other countries think about First Amendment issues in other ways, that the way we approach questions regarding the First Amendment is not the way that all democracies approach those questions. For example, I value the First Amendment, and I think it's important that we be able to talk about any ideas, even ideas that I disagree with. But I also value other concerns and principles. For example, I value equality, and speech that undermines equality presents a special problem for me. I also value dignity and the dignitarian interest that every human being should have. And some nations place equality, for example, or dignity in a preferred position relative to speech. So in this country, it is a practice to say that, as the president said, the First Amendment is a cornerstone value of American democracy, and that we have a basic right today to advance any ideas that we want to. That wasn't always the case in the United States. And if you know much about our First Amendment history, you know that people went to prison for expressing ideas that were contrary to the normative views of our society. We don't send people to prison today in the way that we once did. Since the late 1960s, the view has been that you can advocate any ideas that you believe. What you can't do, and we'll get into this in more detail, you can't threaten people, you can't harass people, you can't advocate imminent lawless action. We'll talk more about that. So while there is a commitment to speech, we also know that there are lots of limitations on speech, that there is no absolute right to free speech in the United States, even though speech is in a preferred position relative to some other constitutional values that I might hold even higher than a free speech value. So that's a challenge. We look at those international materials, and then we shift back to the US materials. And this 200-year struggle at both the federal and state level to determine what speech will be protected in what context. Tonight we're at a university. It's clear that many of you as students, faculty and staff have concerns about what you can say, how you can say things, and whether you can be punished or sanctioned in some way for what you say. I hope tonight we'll have a chance to talk about some of those issues. And I will be intentionally provocative because I don't want to waste your time, and I don't want to leave here not sharing with you what I feel deeply about this topic. But I'll also promise to respect you and listen to you in the way that you are listening to me. So thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Lincoln?
So I first want to thank my co-panelists and JSU, as well as all of y'all. I often think that we discuss free speech in ivory tower. We discuss it as if it doesn't matter to people, as if it's just ideas. And it's more than ideas. It's livelihoods, it's security, it's an ability to feel as if you are free in a republic, the ability to feel like you are free to speak and free to express. But that freedom is not uniform. That freedom is not absolute. The United States Supreme Court has never once held that free speech is an absolute right. Lying under oath is a crime. Companies must tell you what ingredients are in their products, lest we have allergic reactions and deaths. The giving or the provision of classified material is equally verboten. There are valid, good interests that the United States government in each state has weighed against the right of free speech. And I want to, I guess, start with the idea that we often, or at least I often think of the right of free speech as an individual right. I'd like to get us off that narrative, or at least push us past that narrative, that there are societal responsibilities that are associated with the right to free speech as well. That speaking freely is not to speak into an abyss. Someone is listening to what you say. Words carry the power to shape opinions, ignite revolutions, and heal wounds. And it remains this delicate balance that we have of how to justify or how to permit, how to understand a constitutional right weighed against the interests of society. Now, this conversation is as old as the Constitution itself, especially so World War I moving forward, where people literally were jailed for their words as being treasonous. And I encourage you to look at what some of those people said. It's at best not good. It's at best not inflammatory at all, and at worst dictatorial. But it, I think, shows that the nation is charged with keeping the people safe as well as keeping the rule of law. And there are real challenges in that debate and in that discussion. I know that many of you, there were many questions that were submitted, and I know several of them focus on faculty-student relations or faculty-staff relations, freedom on campus. But I'd encourage you to think that there's also rights of free speech in the military, the nation's interest weighed against the rights of people who are sworn to protect it. There are rights in the schoolhouse, that people are, for part of the day, a part of the week in the schoolhouse and subject to instruction, but for perhaps a greater part of the week, they are not students, or at least not students in active learning. And that each of us has rights that transition or vary as we move from one place to the next. That is, our right isn't static depending on time or depending on place. Our right flexes with society and flexes with the needs of society. These are just a few of the questions that I hope that we can examine, speak to steal a word from Professor Fair, to provoke. The First Amendment, I think, is, again, more than just a right that we should discuss esoterically. It's a right that, when it hits the road, really matters. When rubber meets road, it's a right that we really need to discuss what free speech means and how far we're willing to permit free speech in a free society. A society that's bound both by the rule of law, but a society that abhors tyranny.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now we will begin with our questions. Professor Fair, the first question is for you. What speech is not protected by the First Amendment?
So I'll begin this I'll begin this way. Again, advocacy of ideas is generally protected, whatever your ideas, no matter how others find them, no matter how offensive or noxious others might find those ideas. Today we say that those ideas generally are protected. The Supreme Court of the United States has taken essentially a categorical approach to define certain categories of speech that are generally outside of the protection of the First Amendment, including some that have already been referred to. The court has said, for example, that advocacy of imminent lawless action is unprotected. That is advocating unlawful action against the government, against persons. The court has said that true threats, engaging in threats against persons or groups, are unprotected. You will know some of these categories because you live in the country. You know, for example, that the court has said material that falls within the definition of obscene is outside of the protection of the First Amendment. It's more complicated to say what is that material, but we have a Supreme Court decision announcing that obscenity is outside the protection of the First Amendment. Hardcore graphic depictions of sexual conduct. We know that child pornography, material that falls within the definition of child pornography, images of actual children in sexually explicit activity, outside of the protection of the First Amendment. Libel, defamation. We know that the court has said that the press has a qualified immunity when it comes to certain kinds of statements made of or about either political officials, public figures, or more generally, false statements of fact made about other persons. Dr. Lincoln referred to, at least indirectly, perjury. We know that perjury is not protected. There's no safe haven under the First Amendment. Commercial speech, capturing the economic interest or advertising products. The court has said that commercial speech has limited First Amendment protection. The government has to make a certain kind of showing before it can regulate. So the court has, I could go on in the context of schools. The court has said that teachers and students do not shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate. But the court doesn't then define what rights teachers and students and staff actually have in the school. The famous case of Tinker, Des Moines School District, involved young students who wanted to protest the Vietnam War. They didn't want to stand up in class and on top of desks, and they wanted to wear black armbands. But because school officials disagreed with their message, they suspended or threatened to suspend the students. And that case would go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. So we know that speech in the context of certainly K through 12 is more limited, and I think it's more limited for faculty, it's more limited for staff, it's more limited for students. Again, teachers and students don't shed all their constitutional rights or all their First Amendment rights. So it's these categories. Lawyers ask, when approached by clients, we ask questions whether or not a particular attack on speech falls within one of these proscribable categories. And if the speech falls within a proscribable category, if it seems to be advocacy of imminent lawless action, if it seems to be a true threat, if it seems to be obscene, we apply the rules announced by the court for those categories. Outside of those proscribable categories, the presumption in First Amendment jurisprudence is that speech is protected. So if it's not in one of those categories, the presumption is the speech is protected. The burden is greatest on the government to justify regulating speech outside of those categories. Within the categories, the government has to meet whatever the 2 or 3 or 4 part test the court has laid out for us. That's at least a beginning of what's protected and what's not protected.
Thank you.
Dr. Lincoln, in your opening comments, you acknowledged there have been questions about free speech in a university setting, and I'd like to ask you about that. Do university students have the same free speech rights as faculty?
My first thought when I think about that question is that it might be the reverse, that students might have more rights. Now, my starting point for this discussion, or at least my starting point in my head for sort of where my thought process begins, is kind of three questions. One, when is a student a student? Two, when is a faculty member a faculty member? And three, what's the purpose or effect or scope of a university or a school? Universities don't have to provide platforms, but when they do, there's a principle called content neutrality. It's a principle that speaks to everyone can speak and you can't prefer one speech over the other. So if you're a cat lover and a cat club, a love of cat club is created at JSU, and then you hate dogs, if you're the administrator, the person who's creating those clubs, you have to allow a dog club as well. If you're allowing some speech, you allow all speech of that same quality. So for students, I get that there are challenges and perhaps the fear that you're being indoctrinated or perhaps the fear that you're being told what to do. If that were the case, I'd get far less questions about my syllabus. But I assure you, and my honest belief is that you all have more rights, in part because the university is barred from picking favorites in terms of what speech is allowed. The second thought of that is, when is a student a student? So is a student at a class a student? Well, I think clearly yes. Is a student at the student center a student? Well, you're not in class, but you're on campus. You're maybe using your student ID card to get some perk or benefit. So I think probably yes. Is a student on Zoom a student from your dorm room that may be off campus? Are you a student? What if you're a high school cheerleader and you just got kicked off the high school cheerleading club and you're wearing a school sweatshirt and you say, I hate those individuals. Not what she said, but you can get the gist. You can see my self-censoring there. If you're a high school student and you're wearing a school sweatshirt and you say, I hate those individuals and they kicked me off the team for the wrong reason, are you a student when you're texting, when you're on your personal Snapchat? The Supreme Court of the United States 2 years ago said, no, you're not. That at some point, free speech doesn't stop at the schoolhouse doors, but at some point school stops. School doesn't follow you. It's not like a stain. It's not like a taint that follows you wherever you go. Now, if you're at an away football game, perhaps you're a student because you're representing your school, even though you're not actually playing in the football game. But school doesn't follow you wherever you go. At some point, you're not a student, and each of us is a private citizen, and each of us has rights. Second thought, when is a faculty member a faculty member? If I were to teach a chemistry class, one that should never happen, you should drop it immediately. I would be outside my expertise. I have no qualifications, special training, special knowledge, or capacity to understand what H2O is any more than you do. I have no special ability to contextualize material, contextualize conversation, offer thoughts that are meaningful and valuable. I'm effectively a spectator in the class, not unlike you are, and again, you shouldn't be in that class. So a faculty member is a faculty member when they're speaking to something that's knowledgeable, speaking to something that they have training or expertise in. And to the first question, I think faculty members are actually restricted in two different ways. One is the way of the private citizen, and second, and I'm channeling for anyone that wants to Google it later on, a good reflection, a good thought process of this by Dean Post of Yale Law School to Columbia University in 2016, that faculty members are guided both by their free speech rights, governed by the same laws that you and I are governed by, but also by professional discourse and professional norms. If we don't do well, we don't get promoted. Our peers judge us and judge us rigorously and often, with joy sometimes. And we are a self-regulating profession, so we are judged by ourselves, but we're also judged by the community and judged by courts, in addition to whatever norms of university or whatever norms of state law. So honestly, I think faculty have less rights than students do. Third thought, when is a university, or what's the scope and goal of a university? I think the goals of high school and university are very different. The goal of high school might be to keep order and avoid things being thrown. The goal of college is arguably to encourage discussion up to the point of things being thrown, to push and provoke, to ask questions that have no real answers. So the answer isn't A, B, C, or D. The answer is to reflect on what it means to be a citizen in society. That's a question that each of us are going to come to our own conclusions on, but the goal, or my thought process here, is that universities ask different questions, and the goal of the university is different than the goal of high school. So I think your rights are expanded at a university when we're not asking you for yes or no, A, B, C, or D, right or wrong. We're asking you to reflect and genuflect on who you are and where you fit in society.
Thank you, Dr. Lincoln. Professor Fair, I want to stick with this same theme. What should a student do who feels they can't express their views on a topic being discussed in class, or their views differ from that of the professor or in a writing assignment for fear of retaliation by an instructor?
Thank you, Thomas. So first, I think it's critically important that the faculty members create an environment where students feel as if they can speak, that they are invited and welcome to speak and share thoughts. We have enormous power as faculty in running our classrooms and setting the syllabi of what we read. So I think both the university and faculty have a responsibility to create a welcoming environment for all students. I've already suggested to you that sort of my politics are left of left. And yet, for 33 years, I've been at the University of Alabama, where most of the students are not left of left, or they're not. And yet, they seek out my classes because they know the classroom is a place where they can test their ideas, where I will respect them, where I will visit with them and be involved with them outside of class, where I will welcome them to my home, whether they are as liberal or left as I am, or as conservative or right as anyone else in our society. So I think the responsibility first begins with the faculty. But I also know that many students find environments especially challenging. Environments that historically have not been open to them or to people like them, where they feel underrepresented, where they feel disconnected. And again, I think the university's leadership, I think it begins with the Board of Trustees. I think it requires leadership from the president, from the provost, from all the staff and faculty to, again, send a message that all who come are welcome and belong in the same way that the dominant population belongs. That doesn't happen on all campuses, and it hasn't historically, I think, happened at the University of Alabama School of Law. And I'm speaking obviously for myself, not others at the law school. But I would say that to my colleagues. It's not something I would just say to you in secret. I would say it publicly. I am saying it publicly. And so it's always a work in progress. As our community expands and as people begin to express themselves differently in our society, we also have to find a place for them and their voices. That's what the principle of equality means to me. And that's why I think ideas are so important and that we create spaces. If we can't have these conversations in at universities, the democracy is imperiled. We have to be able to talk about ideas and everyone who comes. So I talk to students. I advise a number of student organizations. I work with student organizations where I wouldn't naturally be a member. For example, the Federalist Society will at times invite me to give a talk, usually in response to a Federalist Society invitee. I'm happy to do that because the students have invited me. I work with the American Constitution Society. I work with, whether it's a Republican or Democratic group, a civil rights group, the Durbin, the Women's Law Association. When groups, I feel an obligation because of the position that I hold to be open to students. If the Christian Legal Society invites me or another religious group invites me, I try to be supportive of their programming. In class, I try to create a place where people aren't attacking each other at any point. That's not what the classroom is for, but people are sharing ideas, even counter ideas, and sometimes people disagree, but that disagreement doesn't end the discussion. It's just a way of beginning the discussion. So I think what students have to do is we have to find allies. We have to find people who will create that kind of space for us to develop our own voices. I'm here mostly tonight because of the students. I want to talk to as many students as I can for as long as I can talk, because the future of this country is really in your hands. And you've got to understand that and own that. Many of us are in the winter of our lives, and you are going to carry forward whatever this country becomes. And so your voice and testing your ideas is critically important so that you can take on leadership roles in the legislature in Montgomery or the city council or here or in Congress. We need leadership like never before. And you have to test your ideas. You have to be fierce. You have to insist that your ideas matter as well. And I think the more fierce you are, the more people will respect you and engage your ideas in a respectful way.
Gentlemen, this next question is for each of you. A 2022 survey published by FIRE, and for the benefit of our audience, FIRE stands for the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. They are a First Amendment think tank. Reveal that professors are, quote, biting their tongues, end quote, or engaging in self-censorship over fear that saying the wrong thing might cost them their reputation or even their jobs. Still, other publications, such as Inside Higher Ed, assert that these surveys are unreliable. Is self-censorship on college campuses an issue? And if so, what can be done to address this issue, since colleges were designed to encourage critical thinking and the free exchange of ideas?
I'll go ahead and start off. I really appreciate the panelists' answers to the questions. I think the professor nailed the First Amendment really well. The exceptions, it's a protection against the federal government. We bear that in mind. It was intentionally the First Amendment. A lot of people say it's the amendment upon which the whole Constitution hangs, because if you don't have the right to express yourself freely, you really don't live in a democracy. And the rule of law and the freedoms we enjoy in our democracy are what makes this country the country that it is. So encouraging young people to be involved in the process is really critical. I don't know about that survey, Lori. I don't know enough about what's going on colleges, campuses. I hope that there's not a reluctance by the faculty to express their opinions. It's been said a couple of times, but the reason you go to college, I think, is to learn, of course, to learn how to learn, not just ABCs and math and the other specific subjects you take, but to learn how to think about learning, because if you do get a truly great education, which I know you do here at this university, you'll learn for the rest of your life. Your learning won't stop when you get the degree that you're studying for. You will continue to learn, and you learn from the best professors how to be a lifelong learner. That requires an inquisitive mind, being willing to have your beliefs challenged, and then figure out where you come out once you've been challenged. This issue of free speech on campuses is not a new one. It's really interesting to me to be here tonight to talk about it and what's going on college campuses today. I know a lot of modern elements of our society influence this debate. The internet, social media has all kind of good and bad ramifications. Certainly in the free speech era, whether it's government involvement or private individuals who dominate certain sites, how they influence, where do students get their information, et cetera. It's a two-edged sword, a mixed blessing, if you will. But that's the world we live in, and I think that's very heavily influencing this debate. But that doesn't mean it's more contentious now than it has been. I'll just tell you a little bit about my own experience with free speech. When I started college long ago, the Vietnam War was raging. When I showed up on my college campus, the ROTC building had just been burned down. It was in ashes on the campus right there. You had to choose, are you for this country or are you against this country? It was one of the most horrific times in our country's history. 4 college students were shot dead on a college campus. They were a little bit older than I am for protesting the war by our own soldiers. I mean, that's pretty serious stuff. But through it all, and this goes back to the point I think you made really well, Professor, depends on the administration of the university and the faculty to keep the spirit of intellectual curiosity and exchange of ideas alive, even in the most difficult times. So when I was at school, we had everybody come to speak to us, from Ralph Nader, one of the most liberal, crusading people in the country at the time, and Ronald Reagan. I mean, it was wide open, and if you wanted to go hear William F. Buckley speak, if he came to campus, have at it. If you wanted to go hear Angela Davis speak, and I wanted to see them all speak, because I was really interested in what they had to say. Why were they saying that? What was their experience in life? And I'll share this one anecdote, because I've never forgotten it. Ronald Reagan came to speak at my university, Tulane, back in the 70s, and I was really interested to hear what he had to say, because he's a movie star. I didn't really know much about him. We didn't have all the internet, but you did know he was a super conservative governor, and he was going to, if I believed half the signs on campus, lead us into nuclear war immediately, and the world was going to blow up. And it was just a very, very contentious time. So the night that he was coming, I was very curious to go see him speak, and it was almost a riot on campus. Students were just signs, yelling, bullhorns, you can't imagine. There he came, barreling through the middle of the crowd, walked into the auditorium, and to say it was a hostile crowd would be an understatement. I mean, I was wondering if they were going to let him speak, but they did. In those days, they didn't try and cancel him, just so we're just not going to listen to what he has to say. They got in there, they were all loaded for bear to really drown him out, but he did something I thought was really interesting, and he just said, listen, you college students are here at a very good university. You're smart, you're independent, you have your own brain. I'm going to tell you what I believe. I'm going to tell you why I believe it, and then it's up to you to decide if you believe it or not. If you don't, you don't. That's fine. We live in a free country. But if you'll take the time to check me out and see if you think I'm telling the truth or not, that's all I ask. And so he didn't probably win over very many people in the crowd, but he did gain the respect of the audience because he didn't treat them as children. He didn't try to protect their feelings. He said, I have a view of this country. I strongly believe in it. This is why I do. And I took away from that, that's pretty neat about our country, that you could have that sort of appearance. And it went for the same guys on the left. They may have been more popular at the time. That kind of ebbs and flows with the politics of the country. But in maintaining that environment is what is so critically important. And we're now seeing sometimes where, and I'm not on a college campus all the time, this doesn't happen in the law school so much, but we have to allow our beliefs to be challenged. We can't be so sensitive that we're afraid to hear an opposing view on something and we close our ears to it. I think about it in the context of a law school. I've never met a judge in the country who's going to allow a lawyer to get away with being offended in his courtroom because somebody's made an argument that he didn't like or she didn't like. And so, if that's a trend that's going on, that's not good for our legal system, for our free discourse in our society. So that's just a little perspective from my history, not being on the campus every day like you all are, but I think I feel very confident here at the university. You have great leadership, and it's should be going well.
Thank you, Senator.
Can I just add I absolutely think that self-censorship and some censorship is underway. Faculty, staff, at times feel threatened because at least in some parts of the country, there is concern about certain ideas. The term wokeness is used at times to describe a certain set of ideas around critical race theory, around certain books, some divisive concepts. We see discussions around gender identity, where certain folks in legislatures are seeking to ban conversations about those issues, even if they're initiated by students. You know, if a student asks me about pronouns and whether I will respect her pronouns, first, I'm absolutely going to respect her pronouns, and I'm going to engage in the conversation, no matter what the legislature has to say, because I'm a faculty member, and that student is one of my students. But there are these efforts around the country to restrict those kinds of conversations. And so I think the question in part is asking, what risk do faculty and staff take when they engage in conversations that might be considered divisive by some? Are they vulnerable to discharge? And I think in some places the answer is yes, they are vulnerable to discharge. I happen to be tenured, and so for tenured faculty, I think the risks are far fewer, or the cost to the university would be far greater to sanction a tenured faculty member. But for tenure-earning faculty members, junior faculty or staff who may be at-will employees, it's a much riskier proposition. But again, the context of this is there are efforts to censor certain ideas. Again, when we think about something as fundamental as banning a book, banning books from libraries, not because of their educational suitability. That is, we're not talking about middle schoolers, first graders, or second graders. We're talking about even banning books from public libraries. The 1619 Project is a book that many of you know because you read newspapers, or you know Hannah Nicole Jones's name. And if you've read the book, you know that the authors and the artists who contribute to that project are sharing ideas. And I started this by saying, supposedly in this country, all ideas are protected. And yet, there are those in power who would like to see certain ideas unavailable. That's inconsistent with the First Amendment as far as I'm concerned, and I think as far as the Supreme Court is concerned, and I think we're going to see some of these legislative efforts banned or declared unconstitutional. So, again, I think people do take chances when they engage in certain conversations. But I can't teach constitutional law. It's impossible to teach constitutional law without discussing certain cases. Plessy versus Ferguson, Korematsu versus United States, Brown v. Board of Education. There are many cases that if I can't talk about the historical context of those cases, and whether they're race-based or gender-based or based on sexual orientation, if I can't do that, I can't teach the course. Again, if anyone comes after me, I'm gonna teach my courses as best I can, and in teaching them, I try to go through what is the majority saying, what are the concurring justices saying, and what are the dissenters saying. I rarely say, this is what I think, this is the only way to think. Students will ask me sometimes what I think, and I will tell them what I think. But that's not the point of the class. The point of the class is to discuss what has the Supreme Court said provisions of this document mean. The document doesn't answer most questions. Most questions about the First Amendment are not clarified by the few words of the First Amendment. Instead, we read hundreds of pages of Supreme Court opinions where the justices over time tell us what the majority of the court believes a certain provision in the Constitution means. So that's the way I approach constitutional law as a faculty member. At times I'll have 80 students in a first-year class, and we We go through as many of the cases as we can, and I can't engage the questions that come from students if I'm afraid of whether something I say might be a grounds for dismissal. So I'm going to keep going as long as I can, and hopefully no one will come after me.
I haven't heard anything yet that's going to get you in trouble. Let me just follow up on that, because there are, if you think about the threats that, quote threats, you know, they come from society in general. There's debates about what's books or whatever it might be out there. There's donors to universities, private universities. You start going down one path, pick it, liberal or conservative. Donors on the other side may say, well, I'm not giving you any more money if you're going to teach that kind of thing. Or if you're going to, let's say, remove a monument, if that falls into this category, or whatever it might be. You know, it becomes pressure on what's the administration going to do? Is that going to change their thing? And then, you know, I was reading about an interesting case. I'd be interested in your opinion about this, but, you know, an art teacher wants to teach about art, and she has a representation of the Prophet Muhammad, which is absolutely forbidden in Islam. It's on the syllabus. Here it is. I'm going to teach this class. If you're offended, don't come. Somebody came, was offended, and the teacher was ultimately fired from the university. You know, if that's a trend, you know, I don't think that's very good. That's something to worry about. That's something a teacher might worry about. You know, I don't know very many cases like that, but just preparing for this, I would really wonder what threats are out there. You know, I don't. On books and so forth, I think the answer to that is a book that somebody disagrees with, get another book that tells the other side of the story, and give them 2 books to read. You know, that seems pretty simple to me, you know, and I hope that's the standard practice.
So for much of the past 40 or 50 years, there's been a discussion about diversity in the United States, and institutions, especially of higher education, seeking the educational benefits of diversity, sort of the post-Bakke diversity concept. Diversity and equity and inclusion departments have opened up around the country. Today, they are under fire across the country, where people are losing their jobs, where even using terms like diversity is supposedly anathema. There's something wrong when, again, the whole point of those diversity, equity, and inclusion programs was to address, at least significantly, patterns of historic discrimination in the United States against various populations of people, making our institutions, our flagship 4-year institutions in Alabama and elsewhere, more open to all of our citizens. And that's a good thing. Places like JSU should be open to all persons. And as well as Alabama State or Alabama A&M, the traditional HBCUs and the traditional primarily white institutions, they should be open to all of us. We should all enjoy the benefits and the talents of the kinds of faculty that you have at this kind of place, at this school, right? So again, creating welcoming environments. Well, when you don't have a history of having students of color, for example, students of color want to come into an environment where they feel like they belong, where they feel they have people that care about them, that welcome them, that appreciate and celebrate their difference. They don't want to be outsiders any more than anyone wants to be an outsider. So again, lots is going on, and Senator Strange is correct. There are people under fire. I believe the person in his story was ultimately reinstated, that the university reversed itself. But we've seen a university president recently at Texas A&M propose the hire of an African-American woman from the University of Texas in a professorship that went haywire, with the university president resigning, that professor from UT Austin deciding not to go to Texas A&M. We see those kinds of stories happening as well. So there are risks in the current environment, and it's a highly charged, politicized environment that, in my view, is not respecting the core principle of free speech, where universities and generally the society embraces and protects ideas. even
Yeah.
ones we find offensive.
Yeah, and I think that can become more heightened when there's particularly divisive issue arises. So good example would be the COVID debate. So, I think it's, you could look back and see there was quite a uniform message delivered from the government as to what the origins and treatment for COVID were. And I'm not getting into whether it's right or wrong, but I think there was a lot of suppression of other thought from equally qualified scientists because there was, and I would put that in the category of suppressing academic freedom. If a scientist has another view on a virus or whatever the issue is, I'm just using that as an example, they should be free to express it and promote that and let it be resolved in the conflict of ideas and basic science, it seems to me. So when I see a trend like that, and I'm not taking a side on that, I'm not a physician, I'm just saying that sort of thing creeps in, and the government starts to say, I don't know, I'm not sure that we're going to allow those people to have that position. We're talking about scientists, could be talking about philosophers or any other category of citizens in this country. That becomes a very troubling thing to me, and it happened to take place on the university campus.
Yeah, I'm sure Alan wants to say something, but, as we think about the First Amendment, we want to remember that the First Amendment functions to limit the government when the government is acting as a regulator of private speech. When the government is the speaker itself, the government can, in fact, engage in content or viewpoint discrimination. The government can say, we take a position, whether that position is on something like reproductive rights or COVID regulations or the government, the sort of the anti-tobacco message that the government has promoted over the past 50 or 60 years. When the government is the speaker itself, the court has said generally the First Amendment doesn't function as a limitation. It's only when the government is seeking to regulate what is otherwise private speech. So when the state university says you can't engage in certain expression, that's the government functioning. And again, suppressing what you would otherwise wish to say. Again, while I agree with Senator Strange, I think all of us were harmed by the dysfunction in the reaction to the pandemic and COVID. I believe millions of lives were lost around the globe because of the lack of coordination and cooperation among Western democracies around the world, the most affluent countries. And I'm not a scientist either, but I know that we had scientists, at least in my view, we had some scientists who wanted to say one thing, and we had an administration that wanted to say something else, right? And because that administration is the government can say what it wants. And again, the First Amendment doesn't function in that environment. It's only when it's suppressing what would otherwise be our private speech.
Thank you, Professor Fair and Senator Strange. Dr. Lincoln, I want to get your take on this. So are there limits or restrictions on what a college professor or instructor may say in class?
I guess I'll start by going deep into my mind on executives and presidents. So I believe it was President Coolidge. He had a nickname called Silent Cal. And a reporter in the pool once asked him, said, I have a bet with another reporter that you wouldn't say more than 2 words. And he sort of very quickly snapped, you'd win. All that to say, I think there's a larger point here, and to dovetail off that discussion and then to move into this discussion, I think there's a larger point. And what's troubling to me about civil discourse, and I think undergirding this discussion about free speech is civil discourse, is that often we've transposed dislike with unconstitutional. And there is very little gray area for what I don't like versus what should be permitted. There's a whole realm, and it's been mentioned a couple times already, of things that I don't agree with, but I recognize are constitutional. A whole realm of ideas, of space to talk and connect. And I think what we've reduced lots of conversations to is, because you don't agree with me, you're wrong. Or because you don't agree with me, worse, you are unconstitutional. And I worry about that. I worry about the loss of intellectual discourse. I worry about the transposition of constitutional rights to personal rights. I worry about reducing high ideas of democracy and high speech to, I don't like what's in your syllabus. So I have genuine issues about sort of this transposition of ideas that are my own ideas, and I guess I should have talked about all this, is that these are my own ideas, not universities, so a free speech disclaimer. But to transition to the question, I mean, yeah, there are limitations. I think there's limitations in good taste. I think there's limitations according to the law. I think there's limitations according to what you know. One of the ways that free speech is assessed is whether or not, and this may transition to the next question on hate speech potentially, but is whether the words are intended to cause harm. So if I know that I have a person in my class that had a traumatic incident, I probably shouldn't dance all over that and reflect on it. I probably shouldn't air personal laundry in the classroom. That's a self-imposed limit on free speech. Now, it's not a government limit on free speech, it's a self-imposed limit. But what are the government limits on free speech? What are the things that faculty members cannot say? I think there's a number of them, but a lot of them go to, as Professor Fair noted, sort of good taste and decency, respect for the people in the room. The Constitution, I think, goes further than, protects faculty members further than respect, but I think a good idea is to focus on respect, treat issues as if they're important. They are. You're the subject matter expert. Speaking to myself here, faculty members have power over grades, and grades have power over internships and jobs have power over resumes, and one step leads to the next, It's a cycle that is hard to get around and starts very small. Grades have power, and grades are an expression of the faculty member's power. I think lots of things, well, I'll back that off. I think a good amount of issues could be resolved by just treating what you're talking about with respect, acknowledging that you're the subject matter expert in the field, but that you're not right. For any of us who think we are right all the time, just spend time with literally anyone else and you'll be corrected very quickly. We're not right all the time, that there's experiences and ideas that aren't our own, that aren't native to us, that have happened in the world that influence the perspectives of those that are in the classroom. And unless you have a monopoly on ideas and experiences, you don't have a monopoly on truth.
What are the options for faculty who believe their free speech rights have been violated? And I should offer another disclaimer that, of course, all of your comments are purely educational and not legal advice from each of you.
Me, okay. So I think this answer is going to depend, and I should note that my favorite answer in the world is it depends. It depends is a wonderful answer that assumes that no circumstance is absolute, that circumstances change from time to time, situation to situation. So my favorite answer in the world is it depends. A note for those taking the LSAT, the right answer on the LSAT is almost never, always, or never. If the answer is always it depends, every now and again the correct answer is absolute, but it's often not, neither here nor there. The answer is it depends. I think it depends in part on what type of university we're at. So I think one of the presuppositions of this discussion is that we're at a public university. We're not at a private university, we're not at a religious university, we're not at a military university. So within the construct of being at a public university, where state actors, where faculty and police are state actors as opposed to a private university or a religious university, I think you get to administrative guidelines in the faculty handbook. So the right answer is almost always look at the faculty handbook. What rights do you have under sort of that contract that you signed? Beyond that, that faculty handbook can itself be unconstitutional. So if that faculty handbook is unconstitutional, that itself is a different problem. But the right answer usually starts with look at the faculty handbook for internal resolution, resolution at the lowest level, resolution with the student. Beyond that, it's working with the deans, working with the president, the provost, working with tenure committees, whoever it is. If the issue percolates all the way up, and again, this is not legal advice, I'm way outside my field here, I'm not barred in the state of Alabama, so please don't bring a malpractice claim against me. If the issue percolates past that, then I think it's more of a serious issue, but I think then we're just getting into specific hypotheticals and we're probably approaching legal advice.
So,
Can I just add a word?
yes, please.
To Alan's comment, you know, there should be some limits on what faculty do and say. They're employees at the university, and the university generally has a commitment, for example, to a principle of non-discrimination. And so a faculty member should respect that as a university policy and value, and I assume the faculty handbook and staff handbook would require faculty to be respectful. Each year, university presidents generally share electronically now university policies around non-discrimination, around anti-harassment or Title IX provisions. There might be a campus code of some kind, a student code of conduct, or again, a faculty code. Again, historically, regrettably, faculty abused their positions and engaged in conduct that was inappropriate relative to students, using grades to engage in inappropriate relationships with students, for example. And for decades, that kind of conduct went on without sanction. Today, those kinds of activities are prohibited and sanctionable, and faculty lose their jobs when they engage in that kind of misconduct. So there ought to be some limitations on, again, how do you address students, female students, or how do you address students of color? If you are engaging in racist or sexist or homophobic behavior in the classroom, you should be sanctioned. And if I'm a student in those classrooms and someone's engaging in that behavior, I want the professor to be called to task for that kind of behavior. Otherwise, I am not a full citizen in that institution. I don't enjoy the same educational benefits as other students in the institution. So there's been a sea change on campuses with regard to behavior by faculty, and I think that's appropriate. So those are the kinds of limitations I think that Alan, again, is referring to, at least indirectly, that ought to be in place to protect students because of the power dynamic that faculty have relative to students.
So what about staff who are not protected by academic freedom? Do they have the same free speech rights as professors? And Dr. Lincoln, will start with you, but I'll open it up to all of you.
Again, my starting point for all analysis is every person is a person. Staff member, student, faculty, every person in the United States is protected by the freedom of speech. So yes, there is a bare minimum threshold. You're not going to, status does not determine your rights. Now, it may influence, again, circumstance may influence, in location and position may influence what rights you have and how they're influenced and how they're affected. But the baseline position is that everyone is protected by the First Amendment, or different concept, common law concept, incorporated through the 14th. So like the state or the federal government can't force speech, and they can't do a number of things with regard to speech or expression without getting too deep in the weeds on case law. So it's a whole, yes, a whole bodies of case law that I'm trying to avoid discussing in depth here and to talk about in broad strokes. So yeah, I mean, the starting point for me is everyone has rights. Beyond that, it's, are you exercising free speech? And again, I think there's a weird dichotomy here about what academic freedom is versus what free speech is, but without getting too deep down that trail. If we just associate both as, sort of group both together as free speech, if you are speaking from a position of authority or a position of knowledge on something that is related, and the Supreme Court has a three-part test on this, and I'm not going to go too deep into that either, but if you're speaking from a position of knowledge or a position of sort of authority on a matter that you have authority over, I think you're generally fine. Now, if you are putting in your office all kinds of information that makes students uncomfortable come into your office, it's your office, you control your space. So I think it starts to get a little dicey that even in your office you can make people uncomfortable. And I think that's true of faculty members and staff too. I think long fabled is the email signature, that quote on the bottom of the email signature that everyone has to read because you're making them read it because they're reading your emails. So what is that quote saying? What are you forcing people to read that's outside your scope, but you're trying to quote Sun Tzu, or whatever philosopher or politician you want to quote? So I think there are limits. There always are limits. Again, free speech is measured against the institutional goals, both of the United States and of whatever place you're at. So there are always limits, but a good rule of thumb is if you're speaking on an area that you're authorized to speak on, if the university is paying you to be there and talk about that, you're probably fine. Broadly.
Yeah,
It depends.
yeah, it depends. I think that staff are far more vulnerable than faculty, especially tenured faculty. Staff, especially in jurisdictions that have at-will employment, I think are subject to a greater threat for what they say. I think the cases suggest that university officials can, in fact, terminate staff who, at least in the course of their work, that is, in the course of their duties, say or write things not as citizens, but as employees of the university. And so, again, as Alan said, it depends on the role that you're in, and again, whether you're engaged in the work of the university or whether you're away from your job and speaking as a private citizen. But I think that university staff often serve at the pleasure of whoever has employed them, and so it's important to be, I think, especially careful and thoughtful about what you're doing and saying when you are at work. I don't know that everyone does that, but I've certainly seen university staff, including senior administrators, get into trouble because of something they've written or said that people found objectionable, and then there was a separation from the university in a way that I don't know the details of, but a separation from the university. So I would be especially careful as a staff member.
Thank you, gentlemen. And one thing that I will just mention before we move to another question is there's a variety of free speech or First Amendment think tanks that are out there. Some of them have been around a long time. Some of them popped up over the last few years. But one of the things that I always look for is a think tank that has people from all over the political spectrum as part of its board of directors or its governing body, so that you know that they're interested in free speech for everybody, and not just one side of the spectrum or the other. So those are resources that are available to all of us, and they have staff that deal with this all the time. So if you're curious about something in particular, then that's where you can look. So, Dr. Lincoln, I'm going to direct this next question to you as we move forward. Could you explain to us what is hate speech and who has the authority to define it? And added into that, how does the evolving dynamic of social media fit into this?
In 4 minutes or less. Okay. I'm going to use 10 of those seconds to just think about that. It's a big question. I think hate speech broadly and broadly defined as speech that is hateful, speech that is intended to cause visceral reactions, speech that's intended to cause sort of deeply held emotions or challenge deeply held beliefs. I will back that up by saying that in the middle of the 20th century, a Supreme Court justice wrote, Potter Stewart, one of his more famous lines in Jacobellis v. Ohio, that he knows it when he sees it. And for anyone who knows the case, you know he wasn't talking about hate speech, he was talking about pornography. How Justice Stewart would know pornography when he sees it is, again, a question that's up in the air. But moving past that, speech in the middle 20th century was valued or was constitutional based on its value. Pornography was thought to have no societal benefit. Obscenity had no societal benefit. Hate speech was thought to have no societal benefit. And the law has evolved, as Professor Farron noted in his opening comments, the law has evolved in the 60s to basically all speech is permissible. That whether the idea has some scintilla of public value or some great, is high political speech in a political debate, that speech is generally protected. The example I channel when I think about that is Snyder v. Phelps. So a Lance Corporal in the U.S. Marine Corps was killed in service to his country. And the father of the Lance Corporal wanted to bury his son. That burial was picketed by the Westboro Baptist Church, where the Westboro Baptist Church held up signs, I'll back that up, went to a park across the road from the cemetery, held up signs that said, amongst other things, pretty incendiary words, both about U.S. public policy in the war, about obedience to a deity, and with regards to his father, the Lance Corporal's father, saying, you personally are this. And a lawsuit commenced. The father argued that he was subject to intentional infliction of emotional distress. That is, regardless of the nature of the speech, once the speaker said you, not the nation, not a deity, not the church, but once the speaker said you did this or you were responsible, that incited his emotions and caused him emotional distress. And again, he's literally burying his son. And the Supreme Court held that there is, as small as it might seem, an aspect of free speech and political speech in that it's hateful and it's mean-spirited and it's intended to cause harm and it's intended to invoke emotion, but that there is some aspect, some scintilla of political speech in that, such that the speakers are protected. Now, the court, in that same opinion, offered solutions. So it's not as if there's no solution. Someone is picketing you, you can picket them. You can counter-picket. Someone is speaking loudly, you can ignore them. Someone is hateful or hostile to your belief, do it anyway. That there are private ways to counter hateful speech, but that to classify speech as hateful or positive is to effectively stamp a label on it. And as the government can't endorse one kind of speech and not the other. It can't say we like discussions of cats but not dogs. Now, civilly, emotionally, I like speech that doesn't get me angry. But the Constitution protects speech that gets us angry. Now, there are limitations. The intentional infliction of emotional distress is a tort that is recognized by state law. You can be held liable in civil court for intentionally causing someone emotional distress. But constitutionally speaking, you are protected, and hate speech is almost a misnomer category. If that hate speech if that hate speech incites your reaction, then we're getting into Brandenburg territory. Then we're getting into imminent lawless action. Now, relative to texting, 4 minutes, 2.5 minutes gone. Okay, if we're getting into internet, there's a case from Massachusetts where Michelle Carter texted her boyfriend one night. She knew her boyfriend was having a tough time with his emotions, was having a tough time with his presence and his sort of understanding his place in the world. And he was questioning whether or not he should continue living in this world. And she sent him a text that said, you should just kill yourself. Now, as we all know, text messages are subject to wonderful context. And the boyfriend read that note, and he did, in fact, kill himself. So I think one of the challenges of technology today is that it just speeds things up. That if our test is imminent lawless action, if our test is the imminent thing that's going to happen, texting speeds things up. It's a whole lot less problematic when we're in the days of the Pony Express and you had to, ride your pony a week to go back to your shed to get your gun, to then ride 2.5 weeks to Washington, D.C. The speeding of technology makes imminent lawless action a whole lot more difficult to deal with because effectively the idea behind it is we need to get as close as humanly possible until violent action or lawless action happens, and right at that moment, right before that moment happens, that's when the speech becomes unconstitutional. It just gets so much faster when you're using the internet.
So we started this discussion by saying that there's no absolute right to freedom of speech, and that the court has announced a series of categories where speech is prescribable, where there is some societal concern of harm or a societal interest that makes it appropriate to regulate certain kinds of speech. And the question I want to propose to you to ask is, why isn't hate speech one of those categories? It's not as if we have protection of all speech. The court has not taken that view, as Alan has said. Hate speech is hard to define. Speech that demeans, that denigrates, that excludes people from belonging or from equal citizenship in the United States. Whether it's race-based or gender-based or religious-based, gender identity-based, there are certain kinds of speech that some commentators believe is assaultive in nature. There's no debate. When someone calls another by an epithet, there's no debate there. There's no interest in a conversation. Certain kinds of expression is designed to treat some American citizens as lesser persons. And the question is, again, whether that speech can be sanctioned or punished. Some of you know that in Germany, for example, anti-Semitic speech is unprotected at all times. In Canada, speech that undermines the country's commitment to a multi-ethnic society is proscribable. In some countries, speech that denigrates the dignity of another human being is proscribable. Alan is right that in this country, we have taken the view, since Brandenburg and otherwise, that bigoted speech, whatever the basis of the bigotry, is protected. And as Dr. Owen said, that rather than banning the speech, the court has said the proper response to that speech is more speech. But when someone, again, hurls an epithet at you, they're not interested in your speech. They are interested in telling you that your place in the society is lesser than theirs. And so, as difficult as this topic is, and while I generally have the view that speech ought to be protected, we don't have an absolute rule in this country, and so I've always been interested in why the Supreme Court hasn't said that certain kinds of hate speech is of such a slight social value as a step to truth that it's outside of the protection of the First Amendment. The court has said that in numerous cases, but hasn't said that about hate speech. I believe that's partly true because the court doesn't represent the country. The court isn't representative of the country. It is rare to see much diversity. It, at least historically, has been rare to see much diversity on our Supreme Court. Again, I think there's a context for declaring some things as prescribable, but not this. If, as some commentators, Richard Delgado, Mari Matsuda, Kimberly Crenshaw, and others have said, certain words wound other people, well, that's a societal harm that can be respected as well. But because the dominant society doesn't see certain kinds of expression as harm, the court doesn't sanction it as well. I think we could have a wonderful discussion about that, and so I'm softly disagreeing, respectfully disagreeing with Alan that, and he hasn't really said his own position on hate speech, but hate speech demeans our democracy. It demeans our nationhood, and it also denies the kind of history that we have in the country, where all of us haven't belonged at all times to the nation, where one's position in the society determines what one thinks about the Constitution, what one thinks about the flag. All of us want to belong. We want the flag to be ours as much as it is anyone else's. This nation is a multi-ethnic, multiracial democracy. And And hate speech undermines and threatens that democracy. And that's a reason why we might think more deeply than the court has done about hate speech.
Senator Strange, you earlier mentioned Ronald Reagan and Ralph Nader speaking when you were in college, and since you brought that up, I'd like to address the last question to you with a recent example. In March of this year, Judge Kyle Duncan, a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, was shouted down by law students at Stanford University. His remarks were to address guns and COVID and Twitter. How do we protect the free speech rights of the speaker and of the audience who want to hear the speaker?
Well, that was an unfortunate incident. And I think it happened at a law school, which was doubly disappointing, embarrassing, frankly, to me, whether it had been Kyle Duncan, who happens to be a conservative, or it had been a very liberal judge, to be treated that way. And it wasn't just, I disagree with you. I mean, really personally insulting. I'll borrow your word, hate speech would probably apply there, hurled at him just because they disagreed with his opinions, if they had even read them, you know. It was really a symptom of something I've seen it. You've seen it at a few schools, mainly on the coastal areas. I happen to be at a Ivy League law school, won't mention any names, but, you know, I ran into a student and she was really distressed about her experience because she happened to start school there when the Kavanaugh Supreme Court nominations were going on. That became a very, as all these Supreme Court nominations seem to have become, very partisan, vicious really, and sad for our country that it's devolved to that level. But she said you know, normally in an academic environment, you'd be free to question what's true, what's not true, what do people think, what have people written, why do you have your position? But instead, her experience was the school just immediately took sides. They didn't debate or question. If you were for one, if you were for, they weren't going to have anything to do with you, and if you were against, the other side wasn't going to have anything. So they basically split an entire law school class at an elite institution because they couldn't simply be civil to each other. You know, I don't have I mean, I'm not the expert on all the new, you know, programs in schools, but I like the golden rule, you know, treat your students treat your teachers vice versa, the way you like to be treated. You know, that has worked pretty well for a long time, and it addresses a lot of these issues. So that was very disturbing. I think, like in a lot of these areas, you have an event that becomes a pendulum. It's sort of embarrassing. It's sort of, this is not what we really stand for. You're not going to send lawyers out into the world who are going to be that offended. They certainly won't be very successful, you know, if they can't, you know, stand in someone else's position, particularly a federal judge in this country. So that, I think, is probably a one-off. I think it's coming back, swinging back a little bit. But again, that depends on the policies. I know there's a policy here, depends on strong leadership that encourages civility in the discourse. You know, I'm encouraged by that. I think it'll come back around. That was very unfortunate in that situation. I've certainly never encountered anything like that in my, and I don't know if you have, Professor, but the students have been, you know, civil, and I think the environment's been great where I've been. Hopefully this doesn't take hold because, as the professor said, you know, the Supreme Court, unfortunately, well, for better or for worse, whatever your position is, has become sort of an elitist institution of high priests, if you will, that come out from behind a curtain. They have very limited experience in their lives. They almost all went to, I think virtually all of them, except for one, went to one of two universities for law school. They all served on appellate courts. You know, it's a very narrow, and most all came from the East or West Coast, one from the middle of this country. When Brown versus Board of Education was decided, which was, you know, probably the most significant case I can think of in my lifetime, barely my lifetime, but the Chief Justice was a former governor of California. You had a former president of the state of the American Bar Association. You had a former senator. You had all kind of people who actually had real life experience that dealt with people every day. And they were able to craft a compromise and resolve a critically important issue. So, you know, that's for another day. I don't want to get in my soapbox about that. But I'm hoping we're going to see a switch back to the kind of academic freedom and free speech that we want and expect.
Just one rider, if I might. I think that it's important here to distinguish between the question and what the senator talked about and sort of a different concept. I think it often happens where student groups want to invite speakers to campus, and this may be trying to bridge a gap in the questions, but it often happens that student groups want to bring a speaker to campus. And every now and again, that speaker is dropped or disinvited. I want to just for a moment shed light on one of the reasons that may be, but one of the reasons that's not very well discussed. It's hard to generalize. Again, my favorite answer is it depends, but it's often true that student groups are subject to rules. You have to have a president, you have to have a secretary, you have to have a treasurer, you have to have a faculty advisor. There are just baseline rules that you need to have to be a student organization. And if those are met, you are a student organization. If those are not met, you are not. So every now and again, what you'll see in the news, whether it's at University of Alabama or Jacksonville State or somewhere else, is a speaker gets invited to campus by a student group. Let's just call them Group X. And Group X is inviting a rather provocative speaker. What might happen is if Group X loses its president, if Group X loses its faculty advisor, they no longer meet the preconditions to be a student group. So that speaker cannot be invited because that organization is no longer an organization. And it often gets conflated that the university is saying that you can't speak here. The university is taking a position on speech that you can't speak here. It's literally just the organizational rules. If they're not an organization, you can't use the power of the organization. So it's a finer point, but it's an important point to distinguish that there can be a disinvitation that's not attributable to the university. It literally is attributable to you just don't meet the rules to be a student group.
Oftentimes when people seek access at the university, they want and intend to be provocative. They want to rile up students and others on the campuses. And for the universities, this means that universities have to provide security, have to incur various kinds of cost. So universities are rightly concerned about who is coming to campus. Alan is describing a situation that in fact happened at the University of Alabama where a student organization was no longer an official registered student organization, and so a speaker was disinvited. As Senator Strange said, what happened to Judge Duncan was a travesty, especially at a school like Stanford. It should never happen anywhere. And as Dr. Lincoln said, there are ways that students can engage in counter-protest, counter-speech that isn't disruptive of the event that is sanctioned by the university. That's what I encourage students to do. If someone is having a speaker that you object to, you can go and share your objection or your views, but you can't attack the speaker, you can't disrupt the program. Recently, all of us, I'm sure, saw this at the US Open. Protesters disrupted, someone glued his feet to the floor and suspended the tennis match, right? Terrible. And the SPLC has, I believe, a publication on how students can engage in counter speech that is productive, that invites creates a second program, that invites a different speaker in with a perspective or a discussion that may contradict the other speaker. And I know that Dr. Owens has a book there with her. Erwin Chemerinsky and Howard Gilman have published a book about free speech on campus that really takes account of the competing interests and concerns that universities have when speakers come and cause the kind of commotion that we saw in Charlottesville 2 years ago, or that can happen really on any campus, and the risk that university administrators have to attend to when someone comes and there's a chance of not just a counter protest, but actual violence. This free speech doesn't sanction violence. It isn't a safe haven that for violence, and personal attacks on a speaker, the speaker's family, children. Again, that becomes harassment and true threats and is outside of the protection of the First Amendment. It is much safer for students, especially, to, again, either go and share counter ideas or to have a different speaker either the same time or at another time to advance the ideas that you're most interested in.
Well, gentlemen, our time together is growing to a close. It did go very quickly, didn't it? So I'm going to ask you to begin your closing statements. And within your closing statements, I'd like for you to address what you think each of us can do to return to an era of rigorous, thoughtful, and civil debate, especially in our institutions of higher learning and in our everyday political discourse. So we will go in reverse order for the closing statement. So Dr. Lincoln, we will start with you.
Because if the button wasn't on, it doesn't count. In thinking about my time in the classroom and what influences my teaching, what comes to mind relatively strongly is that ideas that are in the classroom shouldn't just live in the classroom. If the idea is only meaningful to the person that comes in the classroom 3 times a week for 50 minutes, they're borrowing the idea instead of taking ownership over it. The idea needs to go with them. It needs to be theirs. There needs to be a passing of knowledge or a passing of permission to use it. The idea needs to live beyond the walls of the classroom. And I think one of the challenges of tonight and in general is to have a discussion that isn't just limited to the walls of the building, is trying to ask questions that are of meaning and take ideas and critically assess things that are true in our lives. When we talk about free speech, it's easy to talk about it in the context of an esoteric discussion of rights. We can talk about people that have long since died, and we can just talk about in terms of what they've done, not who they are. We don't know their stories, we don't know their paths, we don't know what happened to them. We just talk about them as if they're petitioners or respondents in a case 60 years ago. But free speech lives today. It wasn't decided in World War I, it wasn't decided in World War II, it wasn't finally decided in Brandenburg, it wasn't finally decided in any case. It's a question that continues to evolve. I'm reminded of the very first words of the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law. Well, they do. And so long as Congress can make laws that prohibit certain speech, there's legitimate questions about what speech is or what permitted speech is. So long as Congress can, and I think it's normatively good, for reasons we talk about, perjury, classified information, safety, obscenity, pornography. There's good things that Congress can validly criminalize and validly sort of not permit. But I think we need to ask how far it goes, or how far that right goes. In the context of civil discourse, I offer a gentle reminder. What is permissible and what is preferred are 2 different things. I often will disagree with students. So I often give an assignment where I ask them to write as if they're a Supreme Court justice on a case before the Supreme Court, or give them hypotheticals where I ask them to come to conclusions. There is no rule that I'm aware of that the Supreme Court needs to be unanimous. And if Harvard and Yale educated lawyers, and Notre Dame educated lawyers, don't have to come to unanimity on opinions or cases before it, I'm not going to hold my students to higher standards than the Supreme Court holds itself. There are legitimate perspectives that students own that influence their understanding of rights, and that we as faculty members own that influence our understanding of rights. And it's important to recognize that there is, again, no monopoly on truth. Tolerance is an essential element of civil discourse and arguably a product of it. By getting together, by speaking with each other, ideas can be shared and perspectives can be better understood. So going into a conversation, understanding that you don't have a monopoly of truth, understanding that you don't have a monopoly of truth allows you to use that conversation to work towards a greater truth, a greater societal truth or a greater societal understanding of truth. Now, unanimity of belief is not the right answer. If unanimity of belief was the goal of civil discourse, then effectively civil discourse no longer needs to be civil. If there is one right answer, then just as with a red pen on an exam, you can mark it right or wrong. If there's one right answer, then there's no need to be civil. So the nature of civil discourse, I think, involves perspectives and differing understandings of what the answer might be, that themselves might be reasonable. Now, we've talked earlier tonight about what you might do if you believe an answer to be unreasonable. You can ignore it. You can push back on it. You can counter-protest it. You can counter-program it. You can do any number of things to push back on an idea that you don't prefer. And what is permissible extends beyond civil discourse. What is constitutional extends into uncivil discourse. But I encourage us to aspire towards a greater understanding of truth, a greater understanding of the person that you're talking to. And back to the original point, not everyone cares as much about the Constitution as you or I do. It's not a part of everyone's life in a way that matters. Some of y'all are here for extra credit, and that's cool too. Some of us don't care about the Constitution as an everyday thing. Some of us live in a world where we don't care about intricate details of criminal trials or intricate details of what Congress has done today. And that's fine too. The people that you're speaking to are not lesser than you because you are more in the know. They have their own story and their own experiences and their own values. And as we've talked about once or twice or 10 times tonight, respecting the person that you're talking to is, I think, an underlying principle of civil discourse. That you actually need to and truly invest in the people around you as a means to further discourse and further what the discourse can accomplish.
Professor Fair.
Thanks, Alan. So first I want to thank you all for coming out tonight and allowing us to share thoughts with you about the First Amendment. I'd hoped we would have more time for dialogue and for your questions and actually to hear from some of you. My thoughts on the final question are primarily directed to the students. 45 years ago, I was a student too, and I thought I knew everything. I thought I was right about everything. I thought I was prepared to run the university and to tell then President Terry Sanford and Chancellor Kenneth Pye how Duke University should be run. Reflecting back 45 years, I know that I didn't know everything, that there was much work for me to do. And so a couple of thoughts for the students. First, I hope you will live your values, try to meet people who don't come from where you come from, who don't necessarily look like you or share all the ideas that you share, and try to form a friendship, a relationship where you can test your ideas with and against someone who has different viewpoints. You will deepen your knowledge, you will deepen your own position if you know what the other side is saying and thinking. I hope that you'll develop your voices. I hope that you will participate and care about the country and about the civic institutions that make this country, at least on paper, not always in practice, different from many other countries in the world. I hope you'll care about the local, the state the national and the global, that you will think of yourselves as global citizens all living on a planet. I hope you'll think about what kind of world do you want for yourselves, what kind of world do you want for your children and their children. We often, I think, live in our own moment, and we only think about ourselves in the immediate moment. Democracy is fragile, and it can be lost, and has been lost by nations like the United States around the world. And so there's no reason to think it can't be lost here as well. And as I said earlier, I think the future of this country is really in your hands. And the training that you do here and in graduate programs, or what you do in the workplace, and how you live your lives as citizens actually matters. I think you have to believe that it matters and have to live as if it matters. And for me, that means participating. I participate and I care about these things because people died so that I would have opportunities to be in the kinds of places I'm in today. They sacrificed their lives. And people have made sacrifices for you as well. Your parents, your grandparents, and generations before. So I hope you'll care about what kind of country we have, what kind of civil discourse we have, and that you'll be a participant, not just on the, not an apathetic person, but someone on the sidelines, but someone who actually is engaged, who cares about the most vulnerable people in the society, because we have many vulnerable people, especially in Alabama, who can't fend for themselves, who don't have the educational opportunities that you have, who won't have the employment opportunities that you have, who will not enjoy the economic security that you will enjoy because you've attended a place like this. We are all in this together, and we will survive together or we will perish together. Thanks.
I want to add my thanks to the students, especially for coming out tonight, and the faculty and the administration. Lori, thank you. This has been a wonderful program, and I've appreciated being on the panel with these august professors. I'll just reiterate the need for our students especially to stay involved civically, to learn. There's never been a greater time in our country. You don't have to go to the library. We're in a beautiful library here, but you can get all the information you need right here on every book written in history, I guess, and every political viewpoint, good, bad, and indifferent. So there's no excuses for not being informed and being engaged. I hope you will be, because our state desperately needs it. I'll just refer you, Lori, and I'll leave a copy of this with you, and it's available to the students if you want to go on YouTube or something. But in my final address to the Senate, my farewell address, I made a point of encouraging them, based on my experience there, and it was a great honor, to rediscover the importance of collegiality, of understanding that you're representing millions of people, that it's not about you personally or how many TV shows you're on. It's about what's happening in this country. And the only way the system works in government, and I'm not saying it's working perfectly right now, it never has worked perfectly, honestly, but the whole institution of Congress, particularly the Senate, was founded on compromise. That's a word you don't hear very much about, but it's interwoven in this whole discussion that we've had tonight about treating other people with respect, listening to other views. You will never get in a democratic body 100% of what you would like. If that was the government that we had, we'd have a king, and he or she would get, a queen would get everything they want. That's the reason the founders of this country left the monarchy and created a government where we all in this room have a vote and can determine our future, and all the constitutional benefits that we enjoy and all the freedoms that we have in this country. If we lose the art of compromise, the Senate itself was founded on a compromise. That's why there's 2 senators from every state. Little old Delaware and big old California have the same number of United States senators. That was a compromise. It was a very hard-fought compromise. We forget that. And my message to them, and I'll give you the same message, let's do our best to understand that this country is based on compromise. Principles, Politicians come and go. I've said this many times. Principles endure. This country's founded on principles. We've talked about a lot of them tonight. Let's just don't forget that as we leave here tonight. And again, I just want to say thank you for taking time to be here. It's been a pleasure to be back on the campus, and I look forward to being invited back sometime. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Before I turn the program back over to the president, I just want to say I could not be happier with this event tonight. And my only regret is I think we need a free speech forum part 2. We just could not get to everything, but y'all did such a wonderful job, and we so appreciate you taking time to be with us tonight. Please stay put. We're going to do an official photo in just a moment, and the ADP team, don't run off either. I do believe we have some pocket constitutions that, courtesy of Congressman Mike Rogers and also of the Judge Frank Johnson Institute. Where are those? Do you know where they put them? Okay, they're in the chairs in the lobby. So, so thank you all again for being so gracious and working with us, preparing for this event. And Mr. President, I'll turn the program back over to you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Owens and panelists. Again, if you were not happy to hear what we learned tonight, then you might have fallen asleep or just here for the extra credit. So I hope you took something out of it. And gentlemen, this is why I love being on a college campus, because the opportunity for learning never ceases. And that's why we're here, to impart that wisdom into the future generations as we move forward. Please join me in thanking our panel members and moderators for a job well done again. For their participation tonight, it is my pleasure, along with Provost Shelton, to present each of the panelists and our moderators with a token of our appreciation. Last year marked the 50th anniversary of the completion of this building, the Houston Cole Library. It was officially dedicated 50 years ago this month in 1973. To commemorate and celebrate this milestone, members of the Houston Cole Library faculty and many others published Houston Cole Library at 50 Years, a historical and architectural exploration of Jacksonville State University's libraries. And at this point, they are all have your name inscribed in them. I don't know how they did it, but it was quick and it looks great. So I thank Mr. Green and his team for doing that, but we're proud to present these to you. Professor Brian Fair. Dr. Alan Lincoln. Dr. Lori Owens. For my students here, who want to sign up for one of their classes? We'll see if we can't bring them over. Oh, our faculty want to sign up for their summer class. I agree with you. I'll be in there with you. Also at this time, I invite Debbie Long with the Judge Johnson Institute to the podium for a presentation.
Thank you. And I want to particularly thank the folks, President, the Provost, and my friend Lori Owen for allowing the Johnson Institute to take part in this. This is part of what we do, and I wouldn't be a good chair of the organization if I didn't put in a little plug for us. In addition to, we have a range of programs. A lot of it is civic education for teachers, but we have a particular program. It's aimed more right now at high schoolers, but it could be adapted and for college students, and it's called Civil Discourse and Difficult Decisions. It uses a mock courtroom to teach and illustrate that you can disagree without being disagreeable. Something I think we could all use, and I think that goes to your point, Senator Strange. We have a few gifts. And Thomas, you want to come up and help me? put in a plug for Thomas, too. He's a great executive director, and he does a wonderful job. So, the presentation tonight was so enlightening, and we really appreciate this. We have a little gift for you from the Frank Johnson Institute. Please put it on a desk or somewhere you can see it so you remember us. And we invite everyone in this room to visit us. We are actually located in the Frank Johnson complex. The historical courtroom in that courthouse, if you have never been there, it is someplace you should go. And it is still a working courtroom. Judge Myron Thompson is wonderful about making it available to the public when he's not holding hearings. And sitting in a courtroom where the cases such as the Selma March was decided is inspiring. So we would invite you to give us a call, bring your students, and thank you very much. Again, thank you to the panelists, and thank you to my really good friend Lori Owen, who I know did a tremendous amount of work. But thank you.
And with that, thank you, audience. Have a good evening.